Only with the heart you can hear really well, and the words of wisdom can flow into you. Use an exercise from finger yoga called mudra. In order to listen with the heart, it is important that both hemispheres of the brain are switched on. Place your thumbs on the ring and small fingernail. Hold this mudra all the time while listening to the talk.
Most of the time, there is a voice in your head that comments and has opinions and viewpoints and interpretations about what's going on in your life. I call that the voice in the head. For most humans, that is completely involuntary. They don't even know that they have a voice in the head that never stops talking. Most of the time, silently in your head. At other times, it may even shout something out, so it wants to be heard. And so, if you walk in the street, you will find most people look fairly sane. They're not talking to themselves, it seems, because they're not talking out aloud. But if you listened into everybody's head, you would be amazed of how noisy the inside of every human is. It's like these radio stations where the people talk in an excited voice. They go on and on. If you go to a foreign country and you don't know what they're talking about, you might think this must be extremely important. But if you can understand what they're saying, you realize it's completely meaningless. It's just noise. So a significant part of what happens in your mind, the larger part, is actually just superfluous noise. Thinking is a wonderful ability, a wonderful tool. If used rightly, it is an instrument that causes dysfunction and misery for millions on the planet, unhappiness for millions on the planet, if thinking is not used, but if you are used by thought. So when humans say, I think, in most cases, that's actually not true because they have no control over their thinking. It's a compulsive and involuntary. And they are so identified with these thought processes, they don't even know that they are in the grip of their thought processes because they are so identified, they become their thought processes. So whatever comes into your head, you completely believe in it, and then that's how it is. Leon just mentioned, I don't know, we were talking this morning or yesterday about when I was struggling to survive on a physical plane. I often ate baked beans on toast. I was living in England. There's a little bit of relevance here too, and that could have been a very unhappy period in my life, not being able to live on the next day or the day after. And again, now I'm able to have good meals. occasionally, and I haven't had baked beans on toast in a long time now, but Leon gave me a can yesterday. Now, when I was reduced to eating baked beans on toast, and again, that's a wrong way of putting it, it could have been very unhappy. I was already in my 30s, and so my mind, my mental commentary, the involuntary thought processes would normally have said, this is your complete failure, you can't afford the rent, you don't know, you have no income, you've made a mess out of your life, and this is what I'm reduced to, baked beans on toast. Look at your contemporaries that are driving around in their BMWs. They've got all that, and so this is what life has done to me, or what I have done to mess up my life. I could have had many kinds of narratives accompanying what was happening in the present moment that would have created unhappiness, and I wouldn't even have known it. And this happens, just a small example of how a narrative that you have that accompanies something that you are doing causes unhappiness. And you can do the same thing without the narrative, and you're free of unhappiness. You're eating baked beans on toast, and actually doesn't taste that bad at all. And you swallow, and it is nourishing. And you don't even have to say that. You can simply enjoy the sensory perceptions associated with that without building a sense of self around it. The sense of self that you build around it arises through involuntary and compulsive thinking, me. And the Buddha was already talking about that. So, and this, I'm saying this now in case you need to leave early or want to go across the street. There's just a simple, if you only take this away from this evening, but hopefully there will be much more. If you only take this away, if you look at whenever you feel unhappiness, this is a generic term, unhappiness in whatever form. Unhappiness can arise as irritation, can arise as anger, can arise as even boredom is a form of unhappiness, sadness, all kinds of states that they don't feel pleasant, unhappiness, and usually they are attributed to a life situation, something that's going on in your life. So, for example, waiting at the airline counter, and of course how often things don't go well there. Let's hope they don't drag you out of the plane, but that could happen too. Whenever you feel irritation arising, anger arising, upset in whatever form, ask yourself, is this caused by the situation, or is it caused by what my mind is telling me about the situation? And in 95% of cases, you will find that the mental commentary that argues and complains about something that's going on, but should not be going on, but it is, but shouldn't be. And the gap between what is and what the mind says should be or should not be, that gap is the arising of unhappiness and misery, or as the Buddha called suffering. It arises in the gap between the isness of things in this moment and the arguing with the isness of things in this moment, imposing a narrative on it that says, no, this should not be. I'm not talking about situations where you can take action to change it. There are certain situations where action is possible and necessary. Fine. But even if action is possible and necessary at this very moment, it still is as it is. Then you can take action. But this moment is as it is. So when you leave, or when you allow this moment to be as it is, because you recognize the inevitability of is. This seems so obvious, but it's not obvious to most humans. The inevitability of what is already the case now. And if you can internally align yourself with this inevitable now, the next moment is a different thing, but when the next moment comes, it's now, of course. There is no next moment except as a thought in the head. Where is the future? You've never experienced it, you can't. Impossible. And yet, humans think about it more than the present moment. They want to get to the future because they don't want what is. They believe some kind of liberation or fulfillment will come next, always missing the isness of things. So, if unhappiness arises, examine, does it come? Is it caused by the situation I'm in, or is it caused by how my mind is interpreting the situation? There was a question somebody submitted, I don't have it here, but I remember it, probably asked by a young man or woman, I'm not sure. And he said, this is somebody who is watching us, hi. So he said, when I listen to you, I have this strong compulsion to become a spiritual teacher also. But when I listen to a great business leader, suddenly I have the compulsion to become a great business leader. What to do? And my recommendation to you is to try the business leader first. I also recommend Tony Robbins' seminars, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's one aspect of life. It's, I can do it, yeah, do it. Build up your energy. Yeah. And it's quite enlivening, so it's not a bad place to go to and try things out. There is if let's say that he represents doing and I represent being, but there is, as you know, the symbol of yin-yang, the intertwining the two, and in the middle of the one of the one polarity, the yang, there's a little dot, and that represents the other, and in the middle of the other, there's a little dot that represents the yang. And so I have a little bit of the other in me too, as you can see. And I found to my amazement that Tony Robbins, I don't know when he started doing that, he has introduced short periods of meditation into his seminars, usually towards the end, and then he goes, now let's just be very quiet. And, oh, so that's the other, the other one, the yin is coming into the yang. Oh, that's good. Of course, ideally, in a human life, a human being, you remember what that word means, those two words mean when you put them together. Human is the form that you are, and human is the doing, whatever the form does. The being is who you are in your essence. So you are both. You are the being, the consciousness, and you are the form that that consciousness takes. And the form that that consciousness takes will do things and think and do and act upon the world and be acted upon. So there's hardly any human, there may be some human beings who are completely balanced between the human and the being, who are in the being and the doing, the human and the being. They're right in the middle. Most people go a little bit that way or a little bit more that way. Our civilization as a whole, of course, has gone into the doing mode very, very far to one extreme. So there's the civilization itself is actually mentally ill because of that. And the connectedness with being has been almost entirely lost. So it's a very fragile civilization despite its many achievements. It's a little bit like when you go into a supermarket where they sell fruit. You look at the oranges and they look so shiny and polished, and the tomatoes, they look so shiny and polished, but often when you cut them open, they're completely dry inside and tasteless. So that's a little bit our civilization. The surface appearance is nice and shiny, but if you look deeper, you can say there's something that is something fundamental that is missing there, and therefore the civilization, unless it returns back to some kind of balance between being and doing, it cannot survive for that much longer. And that's why we are here. And so predominantly what we focus on here is the being side, because we need to redress the balance within the collective and in your personal life too, because every individual conditioned by this society tends to live, even starts with little young children. They're already taught to be in the just do and think and right and go, let's get going. Okay, all the tension goes out, and then they start their video games and stuff. They can't focus on anything for very long. That's a huge disability. Many young people have that these days because of the influence of many factors, and especially the video stuff and devices that they have, cannot focus on anything for very long anymore, cannot give attention to anything for very long, because the mind goes. Because that's what, when they watch video games or even many movies, the scene changes every few seconds. And so, if you cannot give attention to something for a certain period of time, there's never a flow of creativity. You cannot, because creativity, you have to, your attention needs to rest upon something, and you need to give it time and look and be with it and become still, and then creativity flows. If a whole generation grows up that is unable to do that, then the civilization cannot produce anything new, and so it cannot even cope with its problems anymore, because even to cope with problems in a good way, you need to be able to look at a problem and be with it, and then allow the greater intelligence to inspire you and then come up with a solution. So humans, as I call it, they are lost in doing, lost in the mind, they're lost in thinking, and because thinking is a kind of doing too. You're doing your thinking. Well, you are not. The thinking is doing stuff to you. You're not even thinking. Thinking happens to you. Humans say, I think. They don't think. Thinking is an autonomous activity in their minds, a reflection of the collective mind. They are not thinking, they are being used by thought, which is, and their personal thoughts are just an aspect of the collective thoughts, and they don't know that. So you are being thought, you don't think. So, and all that is doing, that's the doing mode. those who are naturally more drawn towards being, they don't really fit into our society at all. In older cultures, there was some room for them. They could go, there were many monasteries they could go to, and there were many jobs that actually did not require you to do a lot of doing. You could just be, there were simple jobs that you could do. And nowadays it's harder for the humans who have this natural inclination towards being to fit into this world. Some of them are here now. But even those who are very effective at doing eventually become frustrated and unhappy because they realize the emptiness of their doing. So even those who have become very successful doers encounter frustration and emptiness, not the Buddhist emptiness, a different kind of emptiness. And so society is, our civilization is longing, without knowing it, is longing to return to the roots, to the being dimension. And that's why things like these strange videos on YouTube are becoming so popular, because it is one way of getting a little bit of being and getting out of doing. And so you watch half an hour of somebody handling an object. Wow, so lovely. Well, in business you set certain goals that you want to achieve, and then you take action towards achieving those goals. And in the meantime, there's a lot of interaction with other people who are also working as a team with you, and there's probably also perhaps interaction with other business organizations. So first of all, the goal setting and the journey towards achieving particular goals that the organization has set itself. Once you have a goal, you will find as you pursue your goal as a team together, continuously obstacles arise as you go towards it. Whenever you create something new, you will find it is rarely a very smooth progression. You have to overcome obstacles on the way in the form of people or situations that go wrong. This doesn't work, or try something else. The important thing is not to place an excessive emphasis on the achievement, which is the desired outcome, but to be as present in the doing as you can, so that the doing does not become stressful. Almost every business people who are working in it are under stress, I believe. There may be some that are not, but stress is not the way in which you want to conduct your business, because the environment is toxic. A stressful environment is toxic. So when you can always tell, is the goal something that is for the greater good, or is it an ego-inspired goal? Are you looking, this applies both in a business environment, and it applies equally when you have personal goals. It's the same process is involved. When an obstacle arises, to immediately face the obstacle, which comes in the form of a situation, something not working, something going wrong, somebody trying to sabotage you, perhaps from some other organization, who knows what happens, to never react against the obstacle as if this should not be happening, to immediately to face it and see what is the way beyond it. How can I either dissolve it, bypass it, or use it. So that you don't enter a state of reactivity when obstacles appear on your path. That's important for anybody who pursues a goal. What is your relationship to difficulties and obstacles that arise as you travel towards your goal? And the only conscious way of dealing with obstacles is not to react as if these obstacles should not be happening. So you have to look into what your relationship is with arising obstacles on your path. And this is not just in business, but anyway. The unconscious person in business or elsewhere gets upset, angry, aggressive, despondent, very stressed every time something isn't going the way they want it to go. And immediately dysfunctional inner states arise. And therefore they experience, there are companies where the entire environment is toxic because everybody lives in that way. And ego is also a thing that arises. As much as possible, be aware so that you don't seek ego satisfaction in the doing. There's a personal ego, then one person can sabotage another person in the same company because you are not free of ego identification. So it's very important to be aware so that you do not seek ego satisfaction through what you are doing. Be present in what you do so that the doing becomes joyful rather than placing so much focus on what you want to achieve that the journey becomes very stressful. Then nothing is worth achieving if the journey is stressful. You might, let's say you spent a year or 2 years with some scheme that you want, a new business model or whatever it is. What is the state of consciousness, the collective state of consciousness while you are traveling towards your goal? Is it stressed? Is it stressful? Is there a lot of conflict? Or is it a common enterprise? And is the doing joyful? And it can only be joyful if you place more importance in what you're doing in this present moment than attempting to arrive at some future point. You know where you want to go to, but as the Bhagavad Gita says, do not be too attached to the outcome. Then it's much more likely that the outcome will be good. But if you have an excessive attachment, you need to achieve that. If you have an excessive attachment to outcome, then the journey becomes very stressful. That's something that is important. And I'm talking not from personal experience because I'm not in business, but I have spoken to people, quite a few, who are in the business environment. And so I've been to some relatively conscious companies. They invited me. Of course, unconscious companies wouldn't invite me. And I have spoken to them, and I'm surprised that these conscious companies actually, it's a joy to be there for all the, do the employees, whoever they are, or their partners, do they enjoy being there? That is vital. Sounds very simple. Or are they so focused on some kind of extra achievement that the doing is not enjoyable at all? Do they love being there? What is the relationship with you and your colleagues, partners? those things are vitally important. And what, I don't know how many employees you have. Again, it's important to make the environment as pleasant for them as possible. What is conventionally called love can be many different things, and there are many different levels to it. Some people call it love when they fall in love with someone, which is a clinging, a needing that is partly usually physical, emotional needing of the other, and that's called love. But that is a lower manifestation of what is love, and can easily turn into its opposite from one moment to the next, as many people have experienced, how the person that you fall in love with, you hate a few days later, a few weeks later. Suddenly love, hate are so closely related, the opposites in that kind of love. But the love for your children is a different matter. There's a strong emotional bond with your children, and it can probably, I haven't experienced a mother's love, but probably I can understand that you may get a sense of losing yourself in the other, and that is that strong emotional bond. And then there's another higher manifestation of love that may already be also part of your emotional bond, but it's probably a mixture of emotion plus something else. But that something else is spiritual love, and in some languages there's completely different words for different kinds of love. For example, in Greek there was eros. Eros is one kind of love, agape is another kind of love. What I'm talking about here now is agape, is the love of the other, because it comes from knowing who or what you are and recognizing yourself in the other. And that is we could call the spiritual love, and that's the direction in which you are moving. So the foundation for that is not, I would say, as it's conventionally called, loving yourself. That's a strange thing. Now, many people, quite a few, hate themselves more than they love themselves. Now, it's better, of course, to love yourself than to hate yourself. It's something that people who practice positive thinking and want to shift negative mind patterns may put notices up throughout their house with little messages to themselves, which might say, I completely accept and love myself. Well, I'm sure that's better than I completely hate myself, much better. But there's still a duality there, and it's a very strange thing. Who is loving whom? I love myself. Who are you, and who is that self that you love? People who say, I love myself, don't think about it, what that really means, and there's a little bit of a duality there. I love myself. So there must be two of me. There's the I that does the loving, and there's the myself that's being loved. Strange, really weird. And then as you begin to awaken spiritually, awaken to the presence, then what gradually comes to an end is having a relationship with yourself. Until that happens, people have a relationship with themselves, which is sometimes even manifests as dialogues they have in their head. One part of you talks to another part of you. You are talking to yourself. Now, you really should make an effort to do better. I know you can do better. And the other part of it is, well, I've done my best, but what else can I do than do my best? Then no, that wasn't your best. You should have done remember the voice of your mother, and then you hear the voice of your mother in the background. You really should be doing better. Why do you mess up your whole life? You're just like your dad. That was my mom when I gave up my academic career. Oh, that's your dad in there. You have a relationship with yourself. Very strange. It's kind of split that happens. And that's a part of a normal state of consciousness. Everybody, unless they are awakened, or at least awakening, in which case that begins to recede. But everybody else, they have a relationship with themselves, which is maybe sometimes good, sometimes bad, uneasy. They're proud of themselves, and then they're ashamed, and then they call themselves a loser, or somebody else calls them a loser, and they believe it, or all kinds of weird things, narratives, and so on. And as you awaken spiritually, what gradually comes to an end is having a relationship with yourself. So what is that replaced with? When you no longer have a relationship with yourself, you are yourself. I am. There's no longer two of you here, there's just one. And that happens when you no longer live through a narrative in your head that creates two of you. Sometimes even more than two. You have a whole crowd in there sometimes. And then you have various sub-personalities that are just lurking in the background, waiting to get triggered. So when you no longer have a relationship with yourself, that is the beginning of the end of living through a conceptual identity in your head. You have a certain set of opinions about who you are, which you've adopted from what other people, society tells you who you are. Or you're reacting against what society tells you about yourself, and you adopt the completely opposite position. For example, society might tell you that you haven't achieved anything, but you believe that you haven't done anything because the world is not worthy of you. Because you could write the greatest book ever written, but what's the point? The world is crazy anyway, and can't be bothered. If I wrote a book, it would be the greatest ever. You can have all kinds of ideas about yourself, whether you adopt society's view of who you are, or you adopt a reactive position against it, it doesn't matter. When you transcend that, you just are yourself. You don't no longer live through an opinion in your head about who you are, because who you are is the presence. And that presence that you recognize in yourself as your essence, and when I talk about it, it's always a duality. It's not that you recognize the presence, it's the presence recognizes itself. You recognize. That's what arises, and then you look at the other. It might be your child. And then you have two things happening simultaneously. One is the emotional bond that you feel with people close to you, such as your children or other people that are very close to you. You feel an emotional bond, an emotional connection. But in addition, and more fundamentally, there is a recognition in you of the presence or the essence of the other, and that's not emotional. To recognize the essence of the other, but you can only recognize it through your own essence, the essence that you are. And then you look at the other and you can sense beyond the personality, they are consciousness. And you can look into their eyes, and no matter what behavior they manifest as personalities, you kind of sense something that is beyond that. And what you recognize then in the other is yourself, because it is the consciousness that you both share is the one consciousness. And to recognize the consciousness of the other as your consciousness, as one with your consciousness, that is spiritual love. And there you don't lose yourself. You have found yourself. And so you don't lose yourself in the other anymore. If there's only emotion, then you could lose yourself in the other. But the emotional bond, and then the recognition of the other as yourself happens with anyone. You have the same love for somebody you meet casually somewhere for a few minutes as to a close family member, but with a close family member you have the additional emotional bond. But the spiritual love does not single out one or two people as special. The specialness comes in on the emotional level, and that's fine. So that's gradually there will be a shift. The emotion will still be there, but there's an underlying recognition of the other because you've recognized who or what you are in your essence. And there's no longer, then emotion is fine. There's no loss of self in it anymore, because you know who you are or what you are. So gradually that dimension, because I can predict, because you're here, that gradually that dimension will come more and more into and the relationship with your children. Yeah. And it doesn't do away with the emotion, but something deeper comes in. And that transcends the emotion. Transcend doesn't mean that it excludes it or it comes to an end. Transcend means it contains it, but it is much vaster. Can you speak about how to be in this world with this constant push for connectivity? How did we get to the most profound things from a relatively simple question? Oh yes, we talked about doing and being, without feeling that being present is another thing to do. How to be in this world without this constant push for connectivity? Well, the first thing is you turn off your push notifications. That's already a big step forward. And you need to be disciplined in the use of your device, your phone, whatever, tablet, phone, so that it doesn't take you over, because it's simply an extension of the mind. And if it wasn't enough before we invented these devices, humans had already been taken over by their minds. Even 2,000 years ago, not as much as now, but even 2,000 years ago, Jesus said, "Why are you always thinking about tomorrow? Why are you always worried about the next thing? Look at the flower, look how it lives, in total alignment with the present moment, and it's being sustained by the one consciousness." That's my translation of the... So already then, humans had been taken over by mind, but even more so since then, mind has proliferated, and then the clever human mind came up with these devices. said, let's extend ourselves into the realm of things, and then we can create this, which is an extension of the human mind. So when you might have noticed, when you're with yourself, you have the voice in the head, unless you begin to awaken, in which case you're able to experience spaces of alert, still presence. It's beautiful. But otherwise, you have this thing, commenting, talking, arguing. And then this becomes a burden for many people. Of course it is a burden, because a lot of the stuff it says is actually not pleasant. And so you experience it as a burden, and since you derive your sense of identity from it, it becomes yourself. This talking voice, you think that's you. It becomes the self. And you walk around with this burden of the self. And in order to unburden yourself, one thing you can do, you think you can do, is you can watch the television, or you can go on to watch. There are countless things that you can watch on the little screen. The entire world's knowledge at your fingertips. And the moment you watch the screen, whether it's television or whatever screen, you might have noticed that your so-called own thought processes come to a stop. So to some extent, you're free of the self. This is why people sometimes find watching television relaxing. Say, okay, I just need to relax now, let's turn it on. By this they mean, while they watch the television screen, they are not burdened by their self-induced thought processes. What they do, however, they replace their own thoughts with the collective thoughts. So you're not in a state of thoughtless awareness when you watch television or you watch something on the screen. You absorb the thoughts from there into your mind, and you link into. So for people often in a state of semi or hypnosis when they watch, and it kind of paralyzes you. It can also happen with the screen, with television already started, of course. I don't know whenever 60 years ago, whenever television started, and you go, and so your mind is just absorbing whatever is playing. It's the TV mind, which is receiving stuff from wherever it comes from, is going into your mind, and you become no longer thinking your own thoughts. Occasionally you might, you say, oh, this guy is so stupid, and then you're watching again. And then another thought, why am I watching this rubbish? Half an hour later, this is so awful. But you can't turn it off. Here's the remote. Let's just try one more channel. There might be something else there. Oh no, that's stupid. Try one more. This is how an addict behaves, and the device is even more addictive. Because you carry them with you, and you may have to admit that there is an addiction in you. Not everybody here, but quite a few. It would be almost normal to feel this draw towards it, and you use it even when you don't need to use it. That's the amazing thing. When you're standing at the elevator, waiting, so another person is standing next to you, and he or she is pulling out the phone, and then you pull out yours. You don't know why. Or anywhere, you're ordering a tea or coffee somewhere, and you're standing in line, and if you look around, there's almost nobody, and probably nobody, who is not looking at this little thing. this is scary, zombie-like. Now, if somebody from the past, the so-called past, a time traveler from the past came here, and even not the distant past, let's just say even 20 years ago, and he arrived and would see in the streets, in restaurants, in cafes, everywhere, in public transport, people are walking around with these things, staring at these things. Say, what's happened? Something has happened to humanity. We've all become zombies. Something terrible must have happened. What was that? These are wonderful devices, the incredible possibilities of having access to all kinds of knowledge, but there's always the downside. There's a huge, huge downside to it. They are addictive. They stimulate the mind. The thing you want to become free from, you want to become free of mind, and this will prevent you from becoming free of mind. So as you need to be disciplined enough to not automatically look at it whenever there's a moment and you're waiting for something or whatever it is, and there's no need to check these things. I don't even know what they are, but I just know that Facebook is the biggest thing, and then there's Instagram and Snapchat and countless names, and some people have all of them on their phones, and you need to know the latest thing. Crazy. So, but if you detect the addiction in yourself, then you have to first of all admit that you are addicted. Don't deny it. You know Alcoholics Anonymous. The first thing when you go there, you have to say, I am an alcoholic. Now, some people say, well, that's not a good thing because your identity is not being an alcoholic. Of course not. So it could be misunderstood. But your nature is not being an alcoholic. It is your present condition is that. But to recognize the problem, the difficulty, the challenge is just you stated, yes, I'm addicted to this phone, and I choose not to be addicted. And then you can be the only one in many places who is not looking, in waiting rooms, waiting in line, whatever it is, waiting on the phone for somebody to talk to you, and in the meantime, but you use this beautiful thing of just being present, and you look around, and you step out of thinking, and all the others are still in the hypnotic state. So practice not to use it unless there is a true purpose. If you want the answer to something in a conversation, there's a what is what, then you can get the knowledge. You have the world's encyclopedia there, and then you can look it up. Okay, that's how it is, and then you put it away again. There are some apps that are meditation apps. I want to check them out a bit more. I have a few on my phone, but I haven't tried them yet. They've been there for a year or two. And that would be something great. It transforms something that otherwise would amplify your mind. It transforms it into its opposite. Some people are still coming in, finding their seats, hopefully. Hello to everybody half a kilometer away at the back. A good spiritual practice while we're waiting for everybody to settle down. Why not start with a good spiritual practice, especially for people in the back rows? And it may sound a little bit funny, but it's actually a very powerful spiritual practice. And that is to become aligned with the present moment. Obviously, I'm Mr. Now, so I'm talking about the present moment. Become aligned with the present moment and refrain from complaining, for example, that you are too far away mentally. Very powerful spiritual practice. So then you become okay with the isness of things. And the isness of things happens always in the present moment. You might have noticed nothing ever happens that's not now. One could almost say the word happen must imply present moment. And most people completely underestimate the incredible importance of the present moment and of living in a harmonious relationship with the present moment. And you would be surprised how many people in this world live almost constantly in an antagonistic relationship with the present moment. And that, of course, causes a lot of unnecessary suffering and unhappiness. So, one of the most important things in life to be aware of is your relationship, so to speak, with the present moment. And this is now, of course. Is the present moment welcomed or appreciated, or at least accepted for the way it is, because it already is the way it is? That's the weird thing about the present moment. It's already the way it is. No matter how you argue in their mind with it, the isness of things is already the case. And that's all there ever is in your entire life. Your entire life, this is not something to just understand intellectually, but to grasp at a deeper level. Your entire life unfolds in the present moment. That's all there ever is. That's all there ever is this moment. And most people live as if some future moment, whether it's a minute from now or tomorrow or next year, they live as if some future moment were always more important than this moment. That is implied. They don't tell themselves, oh, the next moment is more important than this one. No, it's an assumption, an underlying assumption, it's a mindset. And that mindset is a form of conditioning, cultural conditioning. And that mindset, by implication, if not literally, always says, there's something more important coming, and I'm on my way to it. And that is a dysfunctional way to live, because you're never fully alive. You never feel at home. You're always looking for your home in some future moment. Or when you get old enough and you realize there's little future left, then you think about the past more than the next moment. This is why many old people talk continuously about the past. So, coming into alignment with the present moment brings about a shift in consciousness. And this is so simple and yet so profound. Now, this shift in consciousness is what our evening here together is all about. It is about a transformation of consciousness in you. And the reason why you're here, most of you, is that this transformation of consciousness is already happening. It's a process for most people. It's already happening in you. And you're here because you know that this, or you hope that this is an opportunity for deepening this shift in consciousness or accelerating the shift in consciousness. There are other terms we could use. We could say it is about an awakening of consciousness. It is about a spiritual awakening. And this is a term that in several spiritual traditions is used and has been used for a long time, the term of awaken, which implies that the ordinary, the normal state of consciousness of most human beings is a kind of dreamlike state. It is a kind of sleep. But people, if you tell that to somebody, says, "What are you talking about? Dream? I'm completely awake. This is just nonsense." There's a sentence in, I believe it's in the book, the little classic, by Saint-Exupéry, the Little Prince, see that book, and I believe it's in that book there's a lovely a sentence that says, "What is essential is invisible to the eye." That's I. What is essential is invisible to the eye. Now, eye stands for all sensory perception. It's not just the visual. So what that points to is that the essential reality is hiding behind phenomenal reality. And you also, every one of you and myself, are, you can't really put a percentage on it, but let's just say you are 90% invisible. Who you are, actually, all what we can see is the outer form of you, and which is a physical body that senses can see. But now we can even, one could cut open, hopefully not, your brain or whatever, and look for you there on a physical level, on a material level, with the most powerful electron microscopes, and they would not find you at all. And that's the strange thing, that you are not a material physical entity. All the things that make up who you are are actually invisible, and they remain invisible even if you cut open your brain or other parts of your body and examine what's there, including your millions of memories. Where do they live? Could you find a memory that you have of your first teacher walking into the classroom when you were 5 or 6 years old? There he or she is. Hadn't thought of her in a long time, but suddenly there she is. Where did she live all this time in your head? In what form? Did she live in the form of certain molecules that are the memory of your teacher? Where would you ever find this, or your room, if you had a room, or the living room of the house that you lived in when you were 8 years old? I could go there, and I can even touch things still and feel that's what that felt like, and there was that table and that curtain. Where do all these countless things live in you? And these are just mind forms, just memories, not to mention the deeper dimensions within you. But even those relatively superficial dimension of just memories are all totally invisible and can never become visible as material entities. So you are, and every human being is, almost entirely invisible. All you see is the surface shell of the body, and all your thoughts, science, we don't even know what a thought is and how it survives in you, but not really. So it's invisible, and you cannot find it in the sensory realm. And so the same, of course, applies to your dog. What is it that you love? We could talk about human too. It's surprising that there are many people who feel more deeply attached or connected to their dog than to another human being. And I'm not saying that that is bad or that should not be the case, but because I can see how and why that happens, because being is less obscured in the dog than it is in the human. In the human, the being dimension, depending on who it is, depending on the density of your mental, emotional conditioning, is obscured by that. Sometimes you can get beyond it, and you can deeply connect with a human and recognize what the consciousness that you share with the other, and when that happens, we call it love. But with a dog, it's easier to do. But it's important to realize that what you love in the dog is the invisible dog. Although the visible is pleasant, it's pleasant to the touch. When you look into the eyes of a dog, then you can sense the consciousness of the dog. So what you really love in the dog is the consciousness of the dog. Otherwise you could have a stuffed dog, or you could have one with have a little electronically controlled dog. Maybe one day they will have it and it goes but it's not the real thing. So with a dog you look into the eyes, and next time with your next dog, realize that the essence of the dog is not what you see. You can sense it when you look into the eyes of the dog. You can sense the invisible essence of the dog, but only if you have some access to this invisible essence, the beingness in yourself. And as I mentioned yesterday, probably, it happens that even people who normally don't have access to that dimension within themselves, they feel drawn to the dog or the cat, because for very briefly, the dog or cat, by connecting with the dog or cat, very briefly it enables this person to have a glimpse of being within themselves. And this is why, I don't know if there's a little book that I produced together with a cartoonist, and since I have a bad memory, the name escapes me at this moment. And the title of the book is Guardians of Being. And it's mainly about dogs, but I believe there are also some cats in it. And it's based on a few quotes of things I have said or written, I don't remember what, and wonderfully inspired drawings that go with the text. So, and I call dogs guardians of being for humans, because I have a theory that millions of more humans would go insane without their dogs. Their mind would just, they provide a kind of anchor into the realm of being. So the realization that the essence of the dog is invisible and also indestructible. And then you still love the dog, but the excessive attachment to the form of the dog might not be that strong anymore. You will still be sad when the dog passes away, but you won't be devastated. This applies now obviously also to humans. When you connect, we're deeply connected with another human being. One of the most difficult experiences in your life is to experience the passing away of a loved one, especially if it seems to come prematurely. Then it's even more difficult, and therefore it is advisable that at all times you keep alive within yourself the realization that this human being is essentially a being, and the human is only a very small part, and this human being is essentially invisible, and what you love in him or her is invisible. Love is the recognition that you share the same essence. And this essence, we could call it consciousness. It doesn't matter what name we give it, but that's what you share. But you recognize yourself, the essence of yourself, in the other. So part of this is, of course, to give more attention to the present moment, because the more you think, the more future you generate. And the more attention you give to the present moment, the less thinking. Because to be really present, you don't think about it, you just are with it, give it attention. I recommend the little things of life, to be more attentive to all the little things that make up every hour of every day, every minute, every hour, and give them more attention. Walking steps, one step at a time. Objects that you're handling, all the time you're handling objects in your life. You're always touching something, putting something here and there. Is everything that you handle just a means to an end, or are you able to just appreciate the simple presence or even of a so-called inanimate object? Contemplation also of all the lovely things that make up your environment, part of your environment. For example, if I were sitting here alone, let's say I'm waiting for everybody to arrive, I might be sitting here looking, of course, at the floor, sense the stillness, and then there's a glass table here, and then there's a glass of water here, and there's a clock and a bell and tissues, and they all reflect the light in different ways. There's a little bit of a rainbow effect in the glass of water here, and then the lights are reflected on the bells, almost like a mirror, and there's the clock ticking away. It's a beautiful scene. Sometimes you go to an art gallery, well, not so much with modern art, but a very favorite thing would be still life artists, and it took a while in art before they discovered the artists in the history of art, before they discovered the seemingly insignificant things and started to give attention to those. Before that happened, they were very much interested in the huge things, the saints or the kings or the huge battle scenes or the big, they painted those things, or the important people, or some dramatic thing, volcanic eruption or whatever, fire, and then at some point they started to discover the beauty and the incredible sense of the quality that is in the little things. They started painting, for example, simple people. The Dutch artists, perhaps they were, I'm not that knowledgeable about artists, but the famous Dutch paintings show not so much big important people. They show simple people, a woman in the kitchen baking bread, simple people sitting around the table eating a very simple meal, and there's the light, incredible light effects. Light comes through the window, and there's an incredible sense of presence and aliveness in the painting. And this is a scene that in normal life you would never have, unless you're really very conscious. Nobody would have stopped and said, "Oh, isn't that amazing? These people are sitting around a table eating a simple meal, and there's light coming through the window." Nobody would have done that. Perhaps after these artists depicted relatively seemingly insignificant things, perhaps it motivated some people to give more attention to that. But even now, people very much overlook that, and you overlook then a large part of your life. You don't give it attention. When I say give attention, there's an element of appreciation of everything, of the little things. And you begin to realize that your entire life consists mainly of little things. Even if you are VIP, it still consists mainly, you're always sitting somewhere, standing somewhere, looking around, handling things, going from here to there, either on a bus or your private jet. And this giving attention, that is sometimes called gratitude. That's kind of part of it, this appreciation. But I don't necessarily use the word gratitude too often, because it implies that you say to somebody, oh, thank you. But there's a simple appreciation of the isness of things, of their presence. So you no longer regard almost continuously your entire environment as a means to an end. And what's the end? You need to get to some future moment where suddenly everything is going to be better than now. And so you're always on your way. It's a stepping stone to the next moment, and every object that you handle has only utilitarian value, but has no value in itself, is never appreciated for its beingness. And then you do the same to human beings. They're only regarded, what can they do for me now? How do they fit into my schemes, into my plans? Because there's a future orientation continuously, which is the mind, because there is no future. It's created by the mind. It becomes extremely enjoyable to be contemplating the little things that surround you. Then there is something, yes, there is an element of gratitude that comes with it. This appreciation is an element of, you appreciate the sense-perceived world. This is an aspect of reality. It's not the deepest aspect of reality, but it is the surface of the ocean, and it's beautiful. And that also means it's not just when you are quietly contemplating, it's also when you're going from A to B to perform some action, you're going to buy something, going to the, whatever it is, post office. Appreciate the journey and every step of the journey, and look around so that the 10 minutes of going to the shop or driving to the shop or taking your bicycle to the shop isn't completely wasted and reduced to means to an end. And you can actually, that every moment is significant. And ultimately it's only ever the one moment. And then this waiting game comes to an end. it becomes very enjoyable to be wherever you are when you have this ability to contemplate the little things, both when you're passively contemplating or when you are moving, in being engaged with things.